welcome back to the Mixing Music Podcast. I'm your host, Dee Kei, and with me, as always, is my lovely co-host, Legally Blonde Lu.
Oh, you know, it's kind of funny. I never knew this about Legally Blonde, but there is a Mandela effect part of the movie. Did you ever know that? There's something that a lot of people can't agree on, which apparently everybody thought that she drove a pink convertible, but it's always been black.
Yeah?
Yeah. I didn't know that there was a Mandela effect debate on that. I found out just the other day, and when I asked one of my friends, he's like, no, yeah, she drives a pink convertible. I'm like, oh shit, this is real.
Fun fact. I don't even remember her driving a car.
I just remember her fighting against all the odds and pushing all the boundaries until she was finally accepted as a full-born lawyer. I just remember the premise.
Well, anyway, welcome back to the Mixed Music Podcast. Today we have an interesting topic. I think it's going to expand into a few different things, but brief overview. We want to talk about a little bit more, diving into genre cultures. We also want to talk about loudness as an aesthetic. This is coming from a couple different things. It sounds like Lou had an experience with a client pushing the boundaries outside of like genre norms culturally. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, a couple days ago, I had a conversation with someone about, he was a metalhead, and we talked about like post-hardcore stuff where it's like, it's metal music, but with like pop vocals.
Yep.
And like, that sounds different. Okay. So like the concept of like a metal song with pop elements will be mixed completely different than a pop song with metal elements. And those are two different vibes. So we'll talk about genre cultures, and some songs that I like and mixes that I think are very interesting. And then I also want to talk about loudness as an aesthetic. This comes from a conversation I had yesterday where I was helping someone master, the basics of Ozone. Mm-hmm. And he was just trying to master some songs to put out. And we're talking about like limiting and loudness in general. And I basically just told him to forget everything that he learned on YouTube. And he's like a producer, a writer, kind of, he has good taste when it comes to creative decisions. And I think when it comes down to mastering, loudness is, at the end of the day, also can be a creative decision. And some things, whether it's culturally because of the genre or expectations of the audience or whatever, loudness is also an aesthetic. And we'll get into that as well. And there's a reason why, like jazz and cinematic music, outside of the practical purposes with like theaters and stuff, those tend to be dynamic. Now, there's some practical elements with cinematic music in like film music. It has to be dynamic. But culturally, why it is more dynamic, we're going to talk about that as well. So let's get right into it. Lou, tell us a little bit about your experience and why this is a conversation you wanted to have and how it relates to what we just talked about.
Sure. So essentially, there's always going to be the question of what version of something is going to be the best version. And it's usually how we share our vision. The reason being is that when we put something out, we naturally want it to be the best it could honestly be without really starting to go so out of pocket that, people start being turned away from it, So the context is really just I was mastering a record for a client. I don't do a ton of country, but I do some country. And this record I actually thought sounded good from the get-go. And the guy asked me, he's like, hey, can I get your honest opinion on another one? I was like, sure. He's like, this one was mixed by so-and-so, and this guy does country all the time, blah, blah, and the producers like it. But I had the other one mixed by a different guy that I wanted to try out. And to be honest, there's something about it that I really like. Like, it feels like it's got balls. And I'm like, country with balls. I like this. Okay. What's going on here? He sends me the record to take a listen to give my opinion on it. I'm like, honestly, I like it. I like how the vocals are forward. I feel like the mix is a little more forward as well. It just sounds like it has a little more energy. He's like, yeah, I like vocal forward music, but I showed it to some of the people that worked on the record and they're saying it's not safe for country. And the reason that response stood out to me is because I've been told in the past when I was first starting that I was mixing too safe. And it was Terrace Martin making that note on the Adam Turchin album that I worked on, which is like hip hop, jazz fusion, like very orchestral kind of stuff. But when he heard the mixes, he also said, hey, that's too safe. And that was the first time I ever ran into that note. And it was early on. And it just meant that I was working way too within the box. Like, yeah, no, jazz, you don't do that. No, you don't do that with horns. And this guy was having that experience. And this is like this is what, honestly, to me, I don't listen to country at all. And I would say it was a good record. I don't have a distaste for country. It's just, you know, a good record when you hear one. You don't have to know what the standards are. You just know that it's a good song. That's it. And that's how I kind of saw it. And I could tell that his whole battle was not necessarily whether if it was a good idea to stay outside of safe, but rather if he should just fall into line of the standards and just push against what he thought creatively was the better option.
And what was the end decision?
Oh, after our conversation, he's moving forward with the one that he thought was best. Because my viewpoint was, I think that you can follow the standards as much as you can. You can learn about the standards. For instance, you can learn about EQ, compression, limiting, the same thing we always say all the time. And now that you know the rules, break them. Be creative with it. Do whatever feels best for you, and how you want to represent your music is how you want to represent it. But when it came to a country record, at no point did I ever listen to the mix and think, wow, this is not country. I just thought, whoa, this is cool. You know what I mean? So it's not like he was pushing against it, but some people want to play it so safe that it starts taking away from the artist being uniquely themselves and just being some kind of amalgamation of the industry.
Great. Yeah. I have a few thoughts about that. I'm glad that you pushed him in that direction. But I think there's a couple things that I want to back up and briefly touch on to kind of expand on what you're talking about with this guy and the decisions that they make. One, I think for me, a bad mix is a distracting mix. So like a bad mix is very subjective, but I think that's the only way to describe it, like objectively. Like a bad mix objectively is distracting. So for example, like a guitar being way too loud can be a great mix if it's not distracting. Like if it's like weird and cool and it forces people to engage more with the song, I think that can be a great mix, even if it is culturally, aesthetically a wild choice. But if the guitar is so loud and it's kind of pulling people away from the song, then it's a bad mix objectively. Right. So I want to be clear about that. So like, number one thing, mix cannot be distracting. It can totally be weird. It just can't be distracting. Number two, I love the concept that you talked about, the idea of like pushing boundaries versus playing it safe and finding the line between that. I agree. I think a lot of bad mixes that I dislike, and this is not just mixes, this is also within the realm of songwriting and producing, just anything creative, even within the realm of art, film, TV, etc. Any sort of creative endeavor. I think the worst results come from people trying to be a safe try hard. Like they're and this goes into like personalities too, but we're going to keep it just at the surface level. This goes deeper than what I'm explaining as, but like, I think people trying to pretend to be cool is the most boring shit ever. And, you know what? I'm in it for the weirdos. Like my favorite art pieces are the ones that piss normies off. You know what I'm saying?
What is that subgenre that we would listen to once in a while where we're like, dude, like this is a real genre and it does get plays?
Yeah, I don't know, but there's outsider like lots of music that like outsider music. Like there's music and art and film and TV that's like most people don't get, and that's fine. Like I love that. The worst ones are like Oh man. I need to be careful because there's also like, I think like later Marvel Universe stuff is just playing it way too safe, where it's like obvious. It's like, honestly, like it's affecting box office money, right? Artists that tend to play it safe, like that paint regular normie stuff. I don't like using the word normie, but I mean like it's kind of playing it safe sucks. It always sucks. It's never, you want to push the boundaries, but again, you don't want to push it so hard that it becomes distracting. With music, with mixing. Now if you're like making art pieces and it's so weird that it's pulling all of the attention away from every other art piece because it's that distracting, that's a good thing. But in music, in mixing, not distracting. Yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts there. I think it's a good move for you and your friend to decide to go with the crazier off the wall one. It sounds like there's one more comment that I want to make too.
Mm-hmm.
With mixing, it's really difficult because I'm gonna try my very best to describe this. I'm thinking of a concept that you'll understand, and I'm gonna try to describe this. I might need your help.
Sure.
Is when you hear a bad mix, especially for us engineers, it's sometimes it's pretty obvious. Drums need to come up, vocals need to be brighter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the time, it is not at all obvious. And like, you'll get into it. Like, you'll see, like, this is hot on my mind, like the idea of like, we were watching Jesse Ray Ernster's mix tutorial videos that he was doing.
Oh yeah, check
and he'll
that
be
out.
like, yeah, and it's like, okay, I think it's the kick drum, and you like do stuff and turn the kick drum up or whatever, and be like, no, that's not it. That doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So one is, again, we talk about this all the time, experienced mixers already know what sound they want and all the plugins and the directions that they go to. Let's try turning up the kick. Let's try using this plugin. It's getting to a destination that they've already decided in their heads, right? To a certain degree, with a little bit of experimentation. But it's most of the time when we hear a bad mix, it's not immediately obvious to even experienced mixers, because it's the way that tracks work with each other, the cohesion between all the tracks. It's the play, it's the bounce, it's the groove, it's the glue, and it's more emotional in nature sometimes. So it's like me and Lou, when we give like mixed feedback, we try our very best to give practical advice. Make the vocals darker or brighter and louder, and the drums more compressed here, and cut a little bit of the 400 hertz. But at the end of the day, even for us, it's a little bit ambiguous. And the best way to figure things out at the end of the day is a little bit of experimenting and, like what you said, pushing the boundaries and trying to figure out, does this work? I want more aggression, but how do I get that aggression? Because like there's a lot of mixes that we hear where it's really safe and we want aggression, but we don't exactly know how to give the feedback of like how to achieve that aggression. All I know is I want more aggression. Try turning up the drums, try compressing a little bit more, and maybe neither of those things actually help achieve aggression. So, sorry, I'm not really collecting my thoughts here.
It's all good. I mean, I hear what you're saying.
It's pretty ambiguous, like a lot of the times. It's not often like an easy solution.
Yeah, sometimes like on the mastering side of things, when it comes to a mix, if I'm sent a mix and they're like, oh, if there's anything that needs to be corrected, a lot of times I'm just listening to the record and just seeing, okay, does it feel over compressed for like the transitional parts and things like that? And it becomes very technical when you think about it that way. But really what I'm listening for is like, does it feel like the mix is losing part of the vibe at a certain point? And am I going to automate that up? Or is this something where I send it back to the mixer and say, hey, there's something in the reverb that's just distracting. It's a little bit boxy where the vocal is at. Like you might want to dip that part in the vocal. I could dip it in the master, but it's going to affect the vocal alongside it. You know, a lot of times the notes I'm sending back is just things that are like, hey, this is standing out a little bit. I don't know if it's supposed to. And it's kind of like what you're saying. Like at a certain point, these changes start becoming distracting. But when we talk about like mixing with emotion and the way Jesse did it, because funny enough, I'm actually doing a YouTube video on that. I hit up Jesse and he gave me permission to like take clips from it. And so I've been taking a lot of notes on it, on topics that I want to talk about, things I want to bring up. Because he even mentioned, funny enough, he said, he's like, okay, I proposed one issue. I'm like, what? He's like, you watch the whole thing and don't learn one thing. And I just said, you got to teach better then. No, but realistically, like, I even told him, like, sometimes it's just kind of a reminder of the basics. You know, it's not that you necessarily forgot or don't know something, but you know, the importance that different people put on different things is something that you want to learn about people. I don't necessarily care about learning the latest plugin. I care more about the methodology and the mindset behind certain decisions. And what's cool about his video in this case is where he's listening to it. Like you said, he's just like, one of the notes I took is like humility in the changes that you make. It's not his record. It's the artist's record. So if the artist wants to get a little weird with it, we're getting a little weird with it, you know? Like, it's cool to just push it, but revolutionizing what they did, it wasn't his goal. It was enhancing what they did, taking the session from where they had it, and then just adding a few little elements. When he added some samples, it was about adding some more life and some more attack and aggression to things, but it wasn't about, you know, this kick sucks, this kick doesn't match this genre. It was just like, it just needs a little love.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's very subtle, sometimes it's extreme, and sometimes it's very ambiguous. We have no idea what the fuck is going on, and it's a little bit of experimenting.
Yeah, you brought up earlier about a pop record that's mixed with metal elements and metal that's mixed with pop elements. One, I love post-hardcore. I'm actually, next month, I'm going to go see Escape the Fate with the LA Philharmonic. I think it's the LA Philharmonic or the LA Orchestra. But I'm gonna go check them out, which is gonna be awesome. Post-hardcore cool with an orchestra. Yeah, dude, I'm excited. I got center seats in the mezzanine in the front just so I could like see it with sky view and everything. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have a great time. But the other day I was mixing a record for, actually, you know him, Billy, who used to be at the studio. And I felt like the kick that was in the tracks just wasn't like poking out enough. Instead of just going for like a hip hop kick, an 808 kick or anything, I literally snagged one of my metal sample kicks and it just had that big beat, like that clicky beater sound. And weirdly enough, adding metal elements to hip hop just gave it the aggression that it needed. He listened to it, never made a note of like using metal kicks in it. He's like, it sounds great. And I was like, cool.
Yeah, I actually use like the top end of like, metal kicks sometimes. Yeah, you got that top end click, you know, that beater to the head kind of sound. Anyway, okay, there was the idea that I want to talk next is like genre cultures and blending the two. This is a concept that I've been toying with recently. I don't know if there's an actual percentage, and this is kind of more of like a thought experiment or like a practice that you should think about. There probably is a threshold between something that is so different that it becomes distracting, right? We were talking about this earlier with the guitars being too loud. And not different enough where it's boring and it sounds safe. Usually new waves of things, even with Beyonce stuff, just pop music in general, with hip hop and when trap came out, like, you know, so long ago, and kind of like distorting 808s in hip hop for the first time.
Or over compressing to the point where it's ducking on purpose.
Yeah. And like, even things like, I'm trying to think of like a lot of different bands and groups and artists that like kind of fuse different genres.
Oh, you see it in, there's a group called Falling in Reverse, which they use trap elements and once again, like post-hardcore stuff, but the singer is known for doing pop vocals on metal stuff, but he actually takes a lot of influence from trap. Recently, he was in an interview where they decided to release a song that was completely out of the box for them, which was, it starts off as trap, then it progresses into metal by the end of the song, but at no point is there a chorus or anything. It's just one long verse that runs for about 3 minutes. But I kid you not, it's so good of a song. I listen to it at the gym, and the progression of it is so smooth that it makes me just want to lift 1,000 pounds, a million miles an hour. You know what I mean? It's one of those where it's like people will fuse genres and do such a good job at it, but they find a way to make it not distracting, but more of a creative musical experience.
Yeah. Interesting. The point that I was trying to get to is I feel like there is a specific percentage of weird that you should go for. Like I do think I'm just making this number up. This is not based on any sort of empirical data, but I think 20 to 30% weird is the perfect amount. I think the ideal amount. Where like if you go beyond that, then it's just kind of like difficult. It's less it's harder to get into. You're kind of excluding a lot of people, but if you stay within that 20% range where it's like it's weird enough, like for example, Billie Eilish's last album where like it was really dark and is not mixed poorly, but like just really raw and aggressive, like, and we're just talking mix wise, right? I think that was great. That was like the perfect amount of weird. Like it was weird, but it wasn't so out of this world that it was still accessible, but it was creative. Like, I think it was like that perfect 20, 25% fusion weird, getting into it. Then another thing too, and I hate to do this because I think he's doing a great job recently. He's doing a lot better recently, but like old Jacob Collier was way beyond that, like 15 to 20, 30%, right? Where it's like, it's just not accessible. It's weird. I just think it's funny that like Music Tech was writing articles about how Jacob Collier was disagreeing with Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin's like, don't make music for your audience. And Jacob Collier's like, I disagree with that. You should make music for your audience. And that's funny because Jacob Collier is the dude that's definitely not making music for his audience.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like, Rick Rubin is the one that is actually making music for his, anyway, it's backwards.
I think there's been like 2 artists that have stood out recently to me in the world of when I first heard them, they were weird to me. One of them is going to be less obvious, but obvious at the same time. SZA. SZA to me for the longest was very weird because it's kind of like how you mentioned on the Billie Eilish. It's dark, but it's also drowned in reverb. But it's so creatively drowned in reverb that like if I just stop in the middle of a song and hit play, it feels off. But if you listen to it from the top to bottom, you get the context of the record and you're like, actually, no, this makes sense. This is actually a dope record. Like, I forget what song I listened to for the first time the other day, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. But I don't know if I'd ever mix the vocals that deep in reverb. I'll see if I can find it. But basically, yeah. The second person was Ari Lennox, because Ari Lennox was doing R&B, but she would never tune her vocals. So you could hear that some of the notes were off. But she does
kind of bring back that like vintage flavor.
Exactly. Almost. And because she has that naturally good voice, she also doesn't like engineers over processing her vocals. So it just, like you said, it's that vintage natural goodness, but it's modern records. But I guess the song is called Low by SZA. If you listen to Low, I love the attitude. It's got, I hate to say it like this, but every time I hear it, it gives me the vibe of she's that bitch in like the most positive and empowering kind of way. Like I hear it and I'm like, hell yeah. But that amount of reverb is a ballsy move. It's not distracting. It goes with it very well. But holy shit, that's a lot of reverb.
Yeah. Anyway, so going back to this concept, I think to easily sum it up without getting over technical, without getting over philosophical or existential here, it's, I think, what every artist, creative, mixer should go for. And this, with a mix, it's more dependent on like the client. Like, so this is advice for the client, I guess. For the artist, the producer, whoever's in charge with the creative direction of the song. Mixers at the top of their game, they're less in charge of the creative direction. They're more of just like cleaning it up. It's more of like a technical thing. But I think in general, when it comes to creative direction, the only thing people should focus on is to be authentic. Blend all of the influences you grew up with. Don't let shame block that. I mean, the reason why Rick Rubin is apparently so good is because he's just like a therapist. He's just allowing people to be really authentic and just try shit without feeling shame. Theo, I was listening to Theo Von's last episode, or a couple episodes ago, when he was talking to a therapist, and he specifically said, like, I loved AA meetings because you just say stuff and that you're like talking about your feelings and there's no crosstalk allowed. So it's like, it's nice to just say stuff without the immediate fear of like being denied, or like that shame or guilt, or like being pressured, or being judged, that fear of being judged. So like it feels the best and it sounds the best when you work on creative projects with zero fear of feeling judged, just being 100% authentic. And I think if you are 100% authentic, and if you focus only on authenticity and being yourself, I think you will naturally find that not try hard, which comes from being afraid of being denied, like that shame, like that internal not wanting to sound weird or look weird, be seen as weird. Like you'll step away from safe and you'll play perfectly towards within that threshold of fusion and pushing things forward. Because on the opposite end, if you're just trying to prove how smart you are, which I think like this is the problem with Jacob Collier, like at the beginning, less so now. Like if it's more of like, I'm just trying to prove something, and it sounds like that, feels like that. You're pushing the boundary too much. It's becoming weird. It's not accessible anymore. It's just like, all right, we get it, dude. Right? So I think if you just naturally stay authentic, trying not to prove anything to anybody, trying not to play it safe and be liked by everyone, I think naturally you'll find that common ground that works best for you. So I think that's good to focus on. But again, as a mixer, the caveat with this is, as a mixer, if you're just mixing, if you're not part of the creative process, well, mixing, I know it's a creative act, but like less than producing, less than the recording engineer with the artist, less than the songwriter, then I think, it's the higher level up you are. If you're just mixing, there's less creative going on. But I still think that that's important to understand. Like with the example that you gave at the beginning of the show, your friend's like, I just think that this version, this aggressive, less normal version feels more authentic. I like it better, regardless of whether or not that's right. I think that is a fantastic reason to go in that direction. The only thing that I would push back on when it comes to this like mixing music production thing is the idea of like demoitis. And this is, it affects even the most intelligent of people. Cognitive bias is strong. And yes, I do think to a certain point, you should step away from a project at the very least, and you should learn to rely on the advice and the thoughts of another professional that you trust, that you've learned to trust, that you've made great projects with in the past, right? And I think that's another reason why it's good to have like a mixer that you trust, or it's good to have a producer that you trust, or a friend that you always trust, that you have rapport with, because you're always understanding, even if they're always wrong. Like oh no, this guy as a critic, like a critic that you always disagree with is also a reliable source of information. Yeah. Because if they're like, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I like this song, then you're like, ooh, hold on, wait a second, we're off on. Like there's a couple movie critics out there like consistently on IMDb, or Rotten Tomatoes, where it's like, I watch them because if they like a movie, then I know it's bad. Just because that rapport across the board, every single movie that they like, I think sucks. So it's like that also becomes a reliable source of information. Yeah. So it's the ones that are like, oh, like I agree with some of them. Oh, I agree with not some of them, that are like hard. It's not as reliable. And yeah, so working with someone that you understand their tastes, kind of know their background, you build rapport with, and understand why they have opinions on different things, like who their influences are. Anyway, I'm kind of getting on the tangent. Let's get into the topic of loudness as an aesthetic and tie that back into genre culture. Yeah. Lu, as you master a lot, right? We both do. Yesterday, he called it a lesson. I don't want to call it a lesson, but we talked about mastering. He's like, I just want to use Ozone, release stuff. And I was like, well, you could just use the mastering assistant built into Ozone. Let's try it out. And I clicked on it and I was like, holy shit, this sucks.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's pretty fucking bad. It is so bad.
I recently got told that an artist that I was being pitched to work with, their management wanted me to master their album. But the artist in the group chat put, I already knocked out the mastering. It's already taken care of. And he's like, who'd you get it taken care of? He's like, the mastering assistant sounded pretty good on it. And I was like, mastering assistant? Who's the assistant? Just out of curiosity. He's like, Ozone's. And I was like, I thought you meant a person. I didn't even think Ozone mastering assistant. I thought somebody's mastering assistant did it.
Yeah, dude, it was wild. I was like, because I was like trying to make his life easier.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, dude, yeah, you're not an engineer. You're just a producer. You just want to upload these files at low effort. Use the mastering assistant. And I said, here's how you do it. You click on this button. And then it processed it. And I was like, holy fucking shit. This is actually bad. And I look back at him. And the first question I asked is, hey, do you like your mix without the mastering on it? Yes. And I said, okay. And all I did was put on the maximizer module and we turned it up to like a regular amount, like -9, -8 LUFS. And I'm like, you like your mix, right? Yes, I like the mix. Okay, then this is all you need. We're done. Because okay, first off, just using the limiter sounded better than the entire doing too much. And I think when it comes to specifically mastering, Lu, I'm sure that you firsthand experience, like, even with among professionals, the only way to fuck up a master is by doing too much. It's almost impossible to fuck up a master by doing too little. I've never heard of such a thing.
In fact, the country record that I did this week, that one is probably the most I've done to a master in recent times, only because there was just a lot of muddiness. And apparently the song was mixed 3 years before. Apparently this song has just been sitting in the vault. So he didn't have the unmastered version, or unmastered, the unlimited version and all that kind of stuff. Apparently all he had was the 16-bit version. And we were trying to bring it up to par. But even then, no. The idea that mastering engineers are completely revolutionizing the mix is not necessarily the case. There are things that we can do that can enhance the mix, but we're not trying to change the mix. You know what I mean? Like, if we can bring out a little more dynamics out of it and still get it a little bit out louder, then cool, but we're not exactly trying to make it be like, oh yeah, that snare is way too loud. Let me make all the processing about making that kick and snare hit the hardest it can. That's not mastering. That
Ozone assistant, it was making mix decisions.
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it does so much that it's like, no, this is trying to mix the song from the 2-bus. That's what this it's not mastering. It's trying to mix the song from the 2-bus. Anyway, I want to say real quick, so one of the things that we did after we did that, and I turned up the limiter and we got it to a loudness. He's like, is this too loud? That was the question.
Mm.
And what we did with Ozone, you could do gain match. So it turns down the volume so it matches the input to the output.
Mm-hmm.
And you can bypass the limiter, the maximizer, without hearing a huge volume difference. And so, like, if it is too loud, you should be able to hear it, like it's squishing too much. And we talked about how, in general, like, we're talking about loudness, the concept of making things as loud as possible, making things as loud as you're comfortable with, without sacrificing anything. And then we started talking about loud as an aesthetic. And this is something that I think is very important with genre cultures, because the jazz is culturally meant to be this easy listening, dynamic, hi-fi, high fidelity. It's not recorded and mixed to sound larger than life. It is mixed and recorded to sound like life. And cinematic music is kind of the same, maybe a little bit larger than life, but like, again, it's supposed to relatively sound like life as if you were in a large concert hall with a big ass orchestra, right? Versus a pop song with typical Charlie Puth it's big, it's bold, it doesn't sound like it's necessarily coming off stage. It sounds like a studio recorded record. It's clean, right? Very different thing. And then you got punk music, which is emotionally, the genre is aggression, teenage angst, just general. And I do think that loudness plays a part in all of these things. I think that getting a song to -4 LUFS is perfect for aggression, angst, just thrashiness, just dirty. It's distorted. It's fantastic, right? With the hyper pop stuff I've been mixing a lot recently, we're going to -4 LUFS, just like pushing, clipping. It's obviously fucking distorted, but that's the vibe. It's very aggressive, right? And I would never, ever even consider doing that to a jazz song. -9 LUFS, -10 LUFS on a cinematic piece, or a jazz piece is way too fucking loud, right? And the loudness needs to, there is a correlation with the culture. Lu, can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, basically, honestly speaking, you actually said quite a bit that's already kind of in place. Now, we talked about genre bending earlier, and that's kind of where you see some differences, where you'll see some kind of like, let's say I got a good example. We've got Sekou Bunch, who's being mixed by Bob Horn. We finally wrapped up his album. The average loudness of this jazz album is between -8 and -7 loops, which is fucking loud for jazz. Like it's one of those where it just doesn't feel right. But because of the style of the music, because of the actual tonality of it, he actually likes everything pretty forward. He's a bass player himself, so he likes that big, almost like, it's not boomy bass. It's very, very defined bass, but there's a lot of finger work that needs to be brought out. So the bass is very compressed to hear all the little minute details in the actual playability. But there's also a ton of horns going on. There's a ton of guitars going on, a ton of synth work going on. There's vocals going on in the song. So for a bass player, you're typically, not to say that bass players are tucked in the back, but in his music, he's trying to be in the forefront. He's trying to be just as audible as the vocals are. So in this case, the loudness is part of the character. It's not something that is necessarily, oh, this is bad for jazz, because we're not mastering it loud to just be louder. We're not trying to hit hip hop standards for any other reason outside of, you know what, let's push it a little. And he will sit, like, it's kind of funny, exactly where I'm sitting, he'll sit right here next to me, just right behind me. And he's listening just as intently as I am. And it's never been a question of like, is it too loud? It's like, hey, can we push it a little harder? Can we push it? Like, can we get a little more out of this? I want to hear something come out. I want to hear a difference. And you already know Bob. Bob is the king of 808s. He is humbly the king of 808s. Every time I hear one of his mixes, I text him like, you got to stop, dude. Just please stop. Like, it's too good. Like, I don't ever want to touch your low end. And I know this guy loves low end. So I'm kind of put in a pickle, man. But yeah, it's one of those where, like, though it is outside of the genre to be that loud, it's very characteristically part of this artist's sound. And that's kind of something you can utilize, the country record that I was mastering yesterday, the mix was delivered to me at -6.5 loofs, and I just kept it there. The goal of mastering at this point was not to make it louder. In fact, it was just quality checking. I heard muddiness in it. We corrected the muddiness, and I defined the kick out of it a little bit because the low end was a little bit not very well defined. But once again, this record was mixed like 3 years ago. They don't have the files anymore. You're working with what you got kind of situation. But sometimes a good mastering engineer knows when it's loud enough already. We're not here to make things louder. At a certain point, you're over compressing it, you're over limiting it, and it's taking away from the mix. And you should know when to leave it alone.
I'm just imagining like the emotional response if we decided talking about like hardcore music or post-hardcore, right? Like imagine mastering or limiting a song and not compressing it and leaving it dynamic enough where a metal song is at minus 14 LUFS.
Oh.
That'd be fucking weird. That would sound so weird.
Yeah. I grew up in the era where Iron Maiden and things of that nature were kind of like the coolest bands. Everybody had Iron Maiden shirts, Cannibal Corpse and things of that nature. And aggression was the descriptor everybody can have for that kind of genre. It was never like gentle. It was never like, oh, this song is so soft. Like if anybody maybe got to minus 14, maybe it was like 3 Days Grace, which is not metal. It's kind of more like hard rock.
Like, does there like acoustic stuff going on? Why
it's
the fuck
more
is
like
14?
It's more like even
that's like at the quietest would be like what 10, 11?
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those where like they just had it's one of those like if you're looking at your integrated meter, which is just measuring your short and long term and just kind of averaging things together just so you know the overall loudness of the overall record, they weren't really hitting -8 with theirs because they only ever got loud in the chorus, but the rest of the song was always very low and mellow. But when you talk about like things like Metallica's Black Album and how the songs were averaging like -4 loofs, yeah, there's a reason why that album also, remember, this is also like 80s. There was a reason that album was noted as like no bass, like bass doesn't exist. Bass was just the third guitarist. The kick was just paper. Like it was the harshest kick to hear, but a lot of people use it as the reference though. Like it was so loud and so aggressive that people were trying to replicate this sound. People want that Black Album snare. People want that Black Album kick. People want that Black Album like sound of like a wall of sound kind of vibe. So Loudness at that point was the tone of the album. It took away from the qualities that could have been there, but it was the sound of the album.
Yeah, so the point is aggression can be added with loudness. There's a mistake that I made, actually. I'm thinking about this now out loud, and can't change it anymore, but the first kids book that my wife and I made, children's book that we made, the song was a good night song. It was a lullaby. It's time for bed, and with that lullaby, I made it too loud. Just overall compression on individual tracks, on the mix bus track, and then limiting it way too much. I was trying for some reason, there was like a lapse in my judgment, brain fog. I was just trying to hit that -9 number. And it was an acoustic song. You can listen to this. Like if you're listening of the podcast and just go to Dee Kei and Lu and like, I think the song is called Time for Bed, or you can go to my Instagram, look for my kids' books and stuff. Listen to that song. It's way overcompressed. It's way too loud. It's off. It's distracting. And I'm not going to take it down and re-upload it just to change the loudness. But I mean, it is, that's like a perfect personal example of like it not working out right. In general, if you are mastering yourself, if you are trying to learn how to master and whatnot, yes, there are kind of first off, fuck off. Don't ever worry about what the normalization standards are for any DSPs. That's like, if you're not like a hyper advanced in the rabbit hole nerd, like don't worry about that stuff.
Yeah, there's
DSP
literally I don't want to say a minor society. There's a collective of people who are now researching that more and more, and we still don't have a straight answer.
Yeah, so don't worry about it. It's just a rabbit hole that's not worth getting into. In general, I would, and DSP normalizations are changing all the time anyway. So just make it as loud as possible that you're comfortable with, that matches the vibe of the song. I do think, for example, if you're working on a country record or like a folky, bluegrass, less aggressive, very open, maybe like a singer-songwriter stage, like a musical type song, whatever. I'm trying to cover all genres here. Less loud, go for -10, -12. And if you, whatever limiter you're using. A lot of these limiters have this like in FabFilter L2 has this 1-to-1 ratio where you can, a volume matches the output through the limiting, and then you could bypass the plugin. It's the same volume before limiting. And if it's making it too loud, like, is the aesthetic changed? Does the aesthetic change? Is it too aggressive aesthetically? You got to think about these things. And then sometimes that aggression is a good thing. And sometimes like, no, it's a little bit too loud. And whether or not it's a final limiter or something done on buses or on individual tracks in the mix, it's up to you. But that is something to consider as well. You want to hit, genre cultures do change, like, 1% at a time, because some songs change at 20% at a time. And then slowly those 20% changes become a trend. And then now you got trap, and now you got distorting 808s, which was never acceptable before. And slowly these genres change, but you still want to relatively respect the genre culture and the sounds of those genres. Hip hop has blown out low end. I mean, listen to any sort of trap 808 where it's like the low end is super huge, and then you listen to metal where it's not at all, right? Not at all huge. And that's the thing too. Like, if a metal song that has hip hop elements in it, like post-hardcore, whatever it is, right? Like they got a section where it's a lot of 808s. It's still not as much low end as a hip hop track by itself. It's still more low end relative to the earlier sections, that's more metal based, but
you'll also see the style of compression in low end be very different. It's much tighter. It's still transient. It's just much tighter.
Yeah, so it's something to consider as well. Again, going back to the beginning, a metal song with pop elements or hip hop elements sounds so different than a hip hop song with metal elements, right? Yeah. So that's just something to consider. And loudness does play a role on that, whether it's on a master bus level or an individual track level or, whatever. So I think we're kind of starting to go round and round in circles and starting to get less direct and less practical.
Chasing
so I think maybe we should chasing our own tail. So let's end the episode here. Hopefully this helps. Typically with Lu and I, we try to instigate kind of your own thinking process, things to look out for, things to consider, bringing things to the front of your mind, and giving you the space to make your own decisions rather than telling you exactly what to do. So I hope that we were able to trigger some thoughts, and you're able to ponder about these things and to try things out, make mistakes, fuck it up. We still fuck up every once in a while, although we don't admit it as minor influencers.
I mean, I'll admit, fuck it up.
Yeah, dude. Just
call me the instigator.
Oh my gosh. All right, but I think that's it. I think last things, are kind of our housekeeping here. If you haven't already, please rate us 5 stars on whatever listening platform you're using. And lastly, if you want more technical episodes, you've heard the exclusive archives. They're great. James does a great job. We do a lot more stuff, including breaking down Jesse's session is this last week. If you pay $4 a month or $40 a year, you get access to all the exclusive episodes that we've recorded up to this point, which is now a couple hundred, and you can binge through it all. It's fantastic. And they're almost all, me and James, we try our very best to always focus less on the philosophical, existential thinking parts and more on the practical, do this, do that, try this. Here's how other engineers have done this. And here's what we think about it. More practical, like there's takeaways with every episode. And on that, well, I guess there are on the normal stuff too. But anyway, mixingmusicpodcast.com/exclusive. mixingmusicpodcast.com/exclusive. And all the exclusive episodes are ad-free. So it's worth it. On that note, anything else that you want to add, Lu?
I love everyone that's listening. I love you.
Gay. Okay. On that note, happy mixing, my friends, and stay saucy.